Have you ever wondered how our streets got their names? How sometimes there's more than one name for a street, one in English, one in Spanish, and how those names have evolved? Well, I'm going to begin to answer those questions today. And in order to do so, we need to look at how Gibraltar changed and evolved and the need for names, street names, at different times. Prior to 1704, Gibraltar was Spanish. So obviously, all the street names were in Spanish. This was Calle Cordoneros, and the cordones were the belts that were worn by the penitentes in the Holy Week processions that were as much a part of Spanish Gibraltar as they were of the rest of Spain. But the persons who made these cordones were called cordoneros, and they were situated here on this street. That's why it was Calle Cordoneros. But the British stopped the tradition of Holy Week procession. This was La Calle de Santa Ana, St. Anne's Street. And in Spanish times, there was a convent here, El Convento de la Merced, and the convent church was dedicated to St. Anne, the mother of the Virgin Mary. We know the Spanish names for some of the streets from contemporary accounts. There was a map done in 1627 by Luis Bravo de Acuña, and it's a detailed map, shows all the streets in the old city, but none of them bears a name. Clearly, the names of the streets were important only to the people who lived there. When Gibraltar was taken in 1704 by an Anglo-Dutch force, most of the 4,000 Spaniards then living in Gibraltar left. Only about 150 remained, and those who left founded San Roque, they founded Los Barrios, and they went to Algeciras, then a derelict ruin, and they rebuilt that town. The small number of Spaniards in Gibraltar immediately began to grow when a sizable number of Spaniards came back from Spain to live in Gibraltar. The Spaniards who remained continued to use the Spanish names for the streets, and so did the newcomers. And of course, at this time, street names were not painted on street corners. So those in charge of the garrison did not know the Spanish names for the streets. Most of them didn't speak Spanish anyway, but more to the point, they did not need to know the Spanish names for the streets because their primary interest was the defense of the fortress and garrison. The British authorities in the 1720s knew this as the Great Street because it was wider than any other street in the old city of Gibraltar, and it was for purposes of collecting rent from the shops on either side, which was kept by the governor. So the name Great Street was more a description of the street rather than a street name. In the 1700s, what mattered to the military was the location of the quarters for the officers and the soldiers. So it didn't matter that this was Queen Street and later Town Range. What mattered was that this was Officers' Quarter number 1. And this was Officers' Quarters number 16. And you can see that the door was converted into a window. The only thing about the civilians that was of interest to the military were the taverns. And that was because drinking was more or less the only recreational activity available to the ordinary soldiers. The taverns had painted signs with the name of the tavern hanging outside the houses, the public houses, and they had names such as the Fighting Cocks, the King's Arms, the Lost Lambs, and so on. Tavern keepers all needed a license from the governor and they had to pay rent. We have lost our tavern signs, but they do continue in many countries. It is thought that Bell Lane was named after a tavern that once stood on this street called the Bell. When there was an inquiry into property ownership in Gibraltar in 1749 that was carried out by General Bland, properties were described not in relation to a street and a street number, but in relation to where they stood next to other properties. So here's an example. Houses on the west side of Main Street, bounded towards the north by Caldwell's Lane, towards the south by a house called the Lost Lands. A map of 1751 of the old city has survived. It is a very detailed map. Every single individual building is marked on it. All the officers' barracks and soldiers' quarters are clearly numbered, and no street has a name. 15 years later, in 1765, the Commandant, Major General John Irwin, ordered that every single house in civilian occupation in Gibraltar should be numbered so that it could be identified. And each house was numbered sequentially, beginning with house number 1 here behind me and continuing to house number 340, because there were 340 civilian occupied houses in Gibraltar at the time. It was not a case of a house being given a particular number on a street, like number 10. It was a case of identifying and giving each property in Gibraltar its own unique identification number. This doesn't mean that there were no names for the streets. Quite the contrary. Names were given to the streets by the English merchants, and they coexisted with the Spanish names which the Spaniards who remained and those who came to live in Gibraltar continued to use. So La Calera became also Crotchet's Ramp. When Genoese settlers came to Gibraltar and Jews from Morocco, they embraced the Spanish street names because Spanish was the language of the ordinary people in Gibraltar at the time, and it was also the language of commerce. This was Caldwell's Lane, named after David Caldwell, a British resident who had a house here on the corner. Caldwell used to take in guests, paying guests, at a time in the 18th century when there were no hotels in Gibraltar. But unfortunately, Caldwell went bankrupt, and at that point, the name of the lane changed to Parliament Lane. The name Parliament refers to the Freemasons' lodge that existed on the building on the site. And that's where the Masons would come to speak or parley. But to the Spanish-speaking population, this street in the 19th century, the early 20th century, was known as El Callejón de los Masones. We have been looking at the names of streets in Gibraltar and how they developed. And here in front of me is a very important document dated the 1st of July 1788. And it is the assessment of the scavenger's tax. Now, the scavenger's tax was paid for the cleaning of streets and for the emptying of toilets. And it is the first complete list that we have of the English names of streets in Gibraltar. So we have here George's Lane, Artillery Street, not name no longer exists, Governor's Garden Street, now Governor Street, Engineer Lane, Lieutenant Governor's Lane, and these were names associated with the fortress. Curiously, one of the few names that has survived associated with the garrison is Engineer Street, now Engineer's Lane. And perhaps this is because names associated with the garrison are no longer as important as they used to be. There were a few street names in 1788 with a local character. Now, this wider section of Irish Town was called Zocca Street. This was Green Market Lane. This was Church Lane, and the church in question, of course, was King's Chapel. Today, it is Governor's Lane. What this reveals is that many 18th century street names have changed over time. At the same time, new Spanish names were adopted for some streets. They included Calle Ingeniero for Engineer Street, now Engineer's Lane, and Calle Comedia for Castle Street, because there was a theatre there. Another new name for a street was Calle del Vicario for George's Lane, because this is where the Catholic vicar lived. So the civilian inhabitants were creating new names in Spanish decades after Gibraltar had become British. And this practice continued as the town of Gibraltar continued to grow and spread further and further up. So this stretch of what is today Prince Edward's Road became known as La Cuesta de Carlo Maria, after Carlos de Maria, who had come from Genoa. Many people do not realize is that streets which did not exist in Spanish Gibraltar and which were built by the British after 1713, when Gibraltar became British by virtue of the Treaty of Utrecht, acquired Spanish names, and these streets were known by the ordinary people by these Spanish names. One of those colloquial names for a street was El Balali for library ramp, and that was because there was a rackets court in part of the Garrison Library estate. Another of those streets was La Cuesta de Mr. Vong, Flat Bastion Road. An important change in the management of the city of Gibraltar came about as a result of the 1804 yellow fever epidemic that wiped out up to half the civilian population of Gibraltar. Public health was now top of the agenda, and Gibraltar was divided into police districts, with a police sergeant in control and in charge of each police district. In addition, the South District had its own police districts. Now, what was done within the police districts is that each house was numbered consecutively. This is the only house in Gibraltar that still retains its original designation under the police district system. You might think of it today as 6 King Street, but for many years, this was District 10, House 19. District 10 comprised the City Hall, the Merchants' Exchange, now Parliament, the south side of John Mackintosh Square, the north side of King's Street, and also all of College Lane and part of Main Street, which was then called Church Street. What is most surprising is how long this awkward numbering system lasted. It continued in use for over 100 years, and it was not until Arthur Carrara wrote to the colonial government in November 1912 as Secretary of the Merchants' Exchange, who were situated here, that things changed. Obviously, shopkeepers could not advertise their premises by reference to a district number and a house number, because the address would not have been understood by most ordinary people, especially visitors. The Exchange Committee argued that streets should have readily recognizable names, that the names should be placed on the streets themselves, and that the street numbers should be displayed on the houses and shops consecutively up the street, odd numbers on one side and even numbers on the other. And these representations from the Exchange Committee were heard. The sanitary commissioners also played an important role in the naming of our streets. Now, when the Sanitary Commission was first appointed in 1865, they were the only representative body on which Gibraltarians were represented. And it was the sanitary commissioners who first placed street names on the corners of our streets. And this one here at City Mill Lane is one of the earliest signs put up by the sanitary commissioners. The sanitary commissioners made recommendations to the governor on the naming of streets. But of course, all the names were in English. It was the sanitary commissioners who asked the colonial government in 1913 that Wardport Street, Church Street, and Southport Street should all three be combined into a single street known as Main Street. This was agreed and came into effect as from the 5th of August, 1913. In 1914, the sanitary commissioners made proposals to the governor for changes to some street names, and in particular to give names to streets that had no names. They included Tuduri's Steps and here in Gavinos. Coming back now to the Spanish names for our streets, they continued in popular use until the Second World War. At the start of the Second World War, the City Council prepared a booklet for the ARP wardens, the Air Raid Precaution Wardens, in case Gibraltar were to be bombed, which in fact was the case. And this booklet contained the name of each street in English, the equivalent name in Spanish, and a detailed location of where exactly that street was situated. After the end of World War II, the Spanish names for our streets were used less and less. As the older generations passed on, and as the newer generations who had been educated in English in places like St. Mary's School here behind me, and for whom English was now the main language, not Spanish, they used the English names for the streets exclusively. The Spanish street names had never actually been recorded on the sides of the streets, only the English names, and that was a factor in their disappearance. The Spanish name for one street has survived. This is La Calle Real, Royal Street, and for many people today, it is still known by the Spanish name in addition to the English name, and it's perhaps fitting that this should be the case for our principal thoroughfare, which in the early days of British Gibraltar was known as the Great Street. Next time, I'll be visiting Governor Street, and we'll begin to explore some of the stories relating to the development and growth of the city of Gibraltar on the eastern side.